The massive crystal hall of the Galactic Council loomed over Ambassador James Miller as he straightened his simple black tie. Around him, beings of various shapes and sizes moved with an air of superiority, their advanced technological implants and shimming bio-enhanced bodies making his plain human form seem almost primitive by comparison. This was humanity's first real chance at joining the galactic community. After decades of trying to prove themselves worthy of attention, Earth had finally received an invitation to present their case for membership. The council chamber itself was a testament to the vast technological gap between humanity and the other species. Floating platforms, holographic displays, and energy fields that defied Earth's current understanding of physics. Miller took a deep breath, his weathered face reflecting both determination and careful diplomacy. At 55, he had been chosen not for his technological expertise or scientific brilliance, but for his deep understanding of human nature and history. The simple blue folder he carried contained Earth's presentation, purposefully kept in physical form rather than using the advanced data systems offered by the Council. Above him, thousands of alien representatives sat in rising tiers, their various appendages and sensory organs all focused on the central platform where he would soon stand. Some looked like collections of crystal and light, others were massive beings of living metal, and a few seemed to exist partially in dimensions he couldn't quite comprehend. "Representative of Earth, please take your position," announced the High Counselor, a tall being whose silver skin reflected the chamber's light like a living mirror. Their voice carried a note of barely concealed amusement, as if entertaining a child's game. Miller walked forward, his footsteps echoing in the vast space. He could hear the subtle whispers and translated murmurs from the assembled species. Many were openly discussing Earth's primitive method of transportation to the Council, a fusion-powered spacecraft that had taken 3 months to reach the Council station. The platform rose slowly as he stepped onto it, positioning him at the center of attention. Massive screens materialized around him, showing his image to those too far to see clearly. Miller noticed how some representatives shifted uncomfortably at his purely organic form. No implants, no technological enhancements, just a human in a simple black suit. The Council recognizes Earth's petition for membership consideration. The High Counselor spoke, their words automatically translated for all present. "Before we begin, we note that your species has only achieved spaceflight within the last century. Most species wait at least 5 centuries after this milestone before seeking Council membership." A ripple of what could only be described as polite laughter moved through the chamber. Miller remained steady, his expression neutral but attentive. "Furthermore," continued the High Counselor, "our scans indicate your representative carries physical documentation. We must remind you that the Council provides advanced data systems for all presentations." More laughter, less polite this time. Miller smiled slightly, a gesture that caught many of the assembled beings off guard. He had expected this reception. Humanity was the new kid on the block, trying to sit at the grown-ups' table. But he knew something they didn't. Sometimes the newest perspective could be the most valuable. "Honorable Council," he began, his voice clear and strong. "Earth thanks you for this opportunity to present our case. Before I begin my formal presentation, I would be interested in learning more about the Council's own journey to the stars. It would help us better understand the path ahead." The High Counselor paused, clearly not expecting this approach. Most species began by desperately trying to prove their worth through technological demonstrations. "Very well," they replied, a note of curiosity entering their voice. "The Council will share its history of advancement, though I warn you, the technological concepts may be beyond your current understanding." Miller nodded respectfully, but inside he felt a small spark of satisfaction. They had taken the bait. Sometimes the best way to teach was to let others speak first, especially when they were busy showing off. Little did they know, every word they spoke would soon become part of humanity's most impressive diplomatic victory. The stage was set. The aliens were ready to lecture, and James Miller, Earth's chosen representative, was ready to turn their own pride into humanity's greatest advantage. The High Counselor's presentation began with a dramatic display of holographic imagery, showing their species' journey from their homeworld to the stars. The images shifted and flowed around Miller, who stood quietly observing as the story unfolded. Our species achieved unified planetary government within our first 1,000 years of civilization, the High Counselor declared proudly. We eliminated conflict through technological enlightenment, reaching the stars as a single, unified people. Miller noticed several council members nodding in agreement, their various appendages moving in what he recognized as gestures of approval. The High Counselor continued, each word carrying more weight than the last. We developed clean energy within our first 500 years, mastered genetic engineering in 800, and achieved faster-than-light travel shortly after. The being's silver skin rippled with what Miller interpreted as pride. All of this was accomplished without the primitive nuclear phase that your species seems stuck in. A representative from what appeared to be a crystalline species interrupted, their voice chiming like bells. If I may, High Counselor, perhaps we should explain to our Earth guest how proper civilizations develop. The emphasis on proper wasn't subtle. My people achieved spaceflight through pure thought manipulation of quantum fields. We never needed to burn chemical fuels like savages. More laughter echoed through the chamber. Miller maintained his calm expression, though he couldn't help but notice how each species seemed eager to outdo the others in highlighting humanity's shortcomings. A massive being composed of swirling energy fields joined in. Our records show that humans still engage in physical combat. They actually train their young to fight with their limbs. This revelation caused several gasps of shock and more barely contained laughter. And their medical practices, added another, this one appearing as a collection of floating geometric shapes. They still cut open their bodies to perform surgery. They haven't even mastered cellular regeneration. The chamber was now filled with various forms of alien amusement. Some were openly laughing, while others made attempts to hide their mirth behind diplomatic facades. The High Counselor raised an appendage for silence, though their own amusement was evident in their flickering skin patterns. Let us review Earth's current technological state. A new hologram appeared, showing various human achievements. Chemical rockets, primitive AI systems, limited genetic understanding. And they paused for effect. They still rely on physical transportation methods within their own cities. This time, the laughter was unrestrained. Even the most diplomatic species couldn't contain their amusement at humanity's apparent backwardness. Tell us, Ambassador Miller, the crystalline being chimed in again, how does it feel to represent a species that still hasn't solved basic problems like disease and aging? We eliminated those concerns millennia ago. Miller stood there, taking in every word, every laugh, every dismissive gesture. His calm demeanor seemed to slightly unsettle some of the council members who expected him to show embarrassment or anger. The High Counselor, perhaps feeling a slight twinge of diplomatic responsibility, attempted to soften the mood. Of course, all species must start somewhere, though usually they wait until they've mastered basic physics before attempting to join galactic society. This prompted another round of laughter, and Miller noticed how some of the younger species seemed particularly eager to join in the mockery, perhaps relieved to no longer be the least advanced in the room. Finally, the High Counselor turned their full attention to Miller. Having shared our achievements, perhaps you would like to withdraw Earth's petition. We could revisit this in a few centuries when your species has advanced beyond its current primitive state. The chamber fell quiet. All eyes and sensory organs focused on the human diplomat. They expected him to either react with anger or slink away in shame. Instead, Miller smiled, a genuine, warm smile that seemed to catch many off guard. Actually, he said, his voice clear and confident, I would very much like to respond to everything I've heard. He opened his blue folder, pulling out a single sheet of paper. With the council's permission, of course. The High Counselor, slightly taken aback by Miller's composure, nodded. You may proceed. Earth representative. Though I'm not sure what defense you could possibly offer. Miller's smile widened slightly. They had given him exactly the opening he needed. Ambassador Miller held his single sheet of paper with steady hands, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the barely contained amusement still rippling through the council chamber. When he spoke, his voice carried neither anger nor defensiveness, but rather the quiet confidence of someone about to play their strongest card. "Thank you, honored council, for sharing your impressive achievements," he began. "But before I discuss humanity's current state, I'd like to tell you a story about time." He paused, letting his words sink in. Not about the future, but about the past. Several council members shifted in their seats, clearly not expecting this approach. The High Counselor's silver skin rippled with what might have been curiosity. 10,000 years ago, Miller continued, "My ancestors were living in caves. They were hunting with sharpened sticks and had just figured out how to make fire." He looked around the chamber, making eye contact with various representatives. 8,000 years ago, we invented agriculture. 5,000 years ago, we began writing. A few dismissive murmurs started, but Miller raised his voice slightly, not in anger but with growing intensity. 3,000 years ago, we were building pyramids with nothing but rope, wood, and human ingenuity. 2,000 years ago, we were developing complex mathematics. 1,000 years ago, we were making our first real scientific discoveries. His words picked up pace, like a drummer building to a crescendo. 500 years ago, we hadn't even figured out that Earth wasn't the center of our solar system. 200 years ago, we were still using horse-drawn carriages. 100 years ago, we made our first powered flight. The chamber had grown unusually quiet. Even the most dismissive council members seemed caught by the rapid progression of his timeline. 60 years ago, we reached our moon using computers less powerful than the translation devices you're using to understand me right now. 30 years ago, we began connecting our entire planet with a digital network. 20 years ago, we started seriously developing AI. Miller paused, his eyes sweeping the chamber. And now, here we stand. From cave paintings to interstellar travel in less time than some of your species take to decide on planetary construction projects. The High Counselor's silver skin had stopped its amused rippling. Several of the crystalline beings had shifted their molecular structure in what appeared to be discomfort. "You speak of unified planetary governments taking 1,000 years to achieve. We went from hundreds of nations to global cooperation in less than 2 centuries. You mentioned clean energy development taking 500 years. We're transforming our entire planetary energy infrastructure in less than 50. Miller's voice grew softer, but somehow more intense. "You laugh at our primitive rockets, but consider this. Every species in this chamber had help. You all had examples to follow, technologies to copy, mentors to guide you. Humanity, we figured it out alone. We looked at birds and said, we should do that. We saw the stars and said, we should go there." He held up his paper, then deliberately folded it and put it back in his folder. "You know what's really remarkable? Everything I just told you. I didn't even need to read it from this paper. Every human child learns this history, not because it's ancient, but because it all happened so recently we can still feel its momentum." The silence in the chamber had taken on a different quality now. It wasn't the silence of boredom or condescension, but rather the silence of dawning realization. "So yes," Miller concluded, "we still use chemical rockets. We still fight diseases. We still have much to learn. But I would respectfully suggest that it's not our current technology level you should be considering." His eyes met the High Counselor's directly. "It's our speed of advancement that should have your attention." The chamber remained silent, but now every being in it was leaning forward slightly, waiting to hear what else this surprisingly eloquent primitive had to say. Miller didn't wait for the council's stunned silence to break. Instead, he gestured to the holographic display system, which responded to his movement despite his lack of technological implants. "Let me show you something about human innovation," he said as images began forming in the air around him. These are all inventions humanity created in just the last century. The display filled with a rapid succession of images. The first airplanes, computers, smartphones, solar panels, and space stations. But what's truly remarkable isn't what we invented, Miller continued. It's how we did it. The images shifted to show various human laboratories, workshops, and even garage workshops. We have this fascinating habit of solving problems in multiple ways simultaneously. The High Counselor's silver skin rippled with what might have been confusion. Explain, they commanded, their previous amusement completely gone. Gladly, Miller replied. When humans face a problem, we don't look for the perfect solution. We try everything. While some of us work on fusion power, others develop better solar cells. While some build electric cars, others work on hydrogen engines. We throw 1,000 ideas at every wall and see what sticks. New images appeared, showing different human teams working on similar problems in completely different ways. You mentioned earlier that your species achieved unified planetary government before reaching for the stars. We did it differently. We raced each other to space, competing and cooperating at the same time. A crystalline being chimed in. But that's inefficient. Why waste resources on multiple solutions? Miller smiled. Because we've learned that sometimes the wrong solution to one problem becomes the right solution to another. Did you know we discovered the microwave oven by accident? A scientist was working on radar systems when he noticed his chocolate bar melted in his pocket. The chamber buzzed with quiet discussions as Miller continued. You see, humans have this remarkable ability to fail upward. Every setback teaches us something new. Every dead end shows us a different path. He brought up new data streams, showing humanity's exponential learning curve. In the time it took most species to perfect one solution, we developed 12 imperfect ones, and then found ways to make them all work together. The High Counselor leaned forward. But your methods are dangerous. Your species has had numerous close calls with self-destruction. Exactly, Miller agreed, surprising them. And each time we came close to the edge, we pulled back and learned. We didn't just survive. We took those deadly technologies and found ways to use them for good. Nuclear weapons led to nuclear medicine. Wartime encryption led to modern internet security. The images changed again, showing the rapid evolution of human technology. In the last 20 years alone, we've begun mastering AI, quantum computing, and genetic engineering, all fields you mentioned taking centuries to develop. We're not doing it carefully or perfectly, but we're doing it fast. A being made of swirling energy fields spoke up. But how do you maintain control over such rapid advancement? Miller's expression grew serious. We don't. Not really. We adapt. We make mistakes. We fix them. We move forward. While your species waited for perfect solutions, we built imperfect ones and improved them along the way. Our first space rockets exploded frequently. Our first computers filled entire rooms. Our first attempts at genetic modification were crude. But we kept going, kept learning, kept improving. He gestured to his simple suit and unaugmented body. You see us as primitive because we don't have your technological implants or biological enhancements. But consider this. In the time it takes your species to approve a new enhancement, we've probably developed and tested 15 different versions. The chamber had grown very still. The earlier laughter was completely forgotten as the implications of Miller's words stank in. They weren't just looking at a primitive species seeking admission. They were watching the early stages of what might become the fastest advancing civilization in galactic history. Miller let the silence stretch for a moment before adding quietly, "And we're just getting started." Miller watched the tension build in the council chamber as he prepared to deliver what he considered the most important part of his presentation. The earlier mockery had transformed into an uneasy silence, but he knew there was more they needed to understand about humanity. "Let me tell you about Earth," he began, as new images appeared showing their blue planet. "Our world tried to kill us every step of the way. Earthquakes, volcanoes, hurricanes, diseases. We evolved on a planet that never made anything easy. The holographic display shifted to show various natural disasters and harsh environments. While many species evolved in stable environments, we adapted to survive everywhere, from Arctic ice to burning deserts, from mountain peaks to ocean depths. A representative made of pure energy fields interrupted. But surely that would slow down development. How could you advance while constantly fighting for survival? Miller's eyes lit up. They'd asked exactly the right question. That's the beautiful irony. These challenges didn't slow us down. They sped us up. Every disaster taught us something new. Every hardship forced us to innovate. The images changed to show early human settlements, gradually advancing through time. When floods threatened our crops, we built irrigation systems. When winters froze our people, we mastered fire and created clothing. When distances separated us, we invented ever faster ways to travel. But that's just basic survival. The High Counselor interjected. All species face such challenges. True, Miller acknowledged. But here's where humans are different. We're never satisfied with just surviving. We see a mountain, and even though we can live perfectly well at its base, we climb it because it's there. We look at the ocean depths, not as a barrier, but as a challenge to overcome. He brought up images of human explorers throughout history. We send people to the most hostile environments imaginable, not because we have to, but because we want to understand everything. Our curiosity consistently overrides our fear. The chamber stirred as Miller continued. You mentioned earlier that we still engage in physical combat. That's true, but have you considered why we're so good at it? We're not the strongest species, not the fastest, not the most durable, but we learn to use every weakness as a strength. The display showed various human sports and athletic competitions. We turn everything into a challenge. Even our recreation involves pushing boundaries. We invented thousands of games just to test ourselves against each other. We simulate problems just to practice solving them. A crystalline being chimed in, but such constant competition must hinder cooperation. Miller smiled warmly. Actually, it's the opposite. Humans have a unique ability to be fiercely competitive and deeply cooperative at the same time. We compete to find the best solutions, then share them with everyone. We argue passionately about ideas, then work together to implement the best ones. The images shifted to show various international scientific collaborations. Right now, on Earth, millions of humans are working on solving the same problems in different ways. They're competing to be first, but they're also sharing their findings, building on each other's work, and celebrating each other's successes. He paused, letting the implications sink in. Every limitation you've mocked, our physical bodies, our chemical rockets, our primitive medical techniques, represents a challenge we're actively working to overcome. Not carefully, not slowly, but with the full force of billions of minds all tackling the problem from different angles. The chamber had grown very still as Miller delivered his final point. You see our current technology level as primitive. We see it as temporary. You measure progress in centuries. We measure it in years, sometimes months. You wait for the perfect solution. We try everything until something works. A small smile played across his face as he added, and perhaps most importantly, we've learned that our greatest achievements often come from proving others wrong when they say something is impossible. The silence that followed was profound. The council members looked at each other, their earlier amusement completely forgotten. They were beginning to understand that they weren't just dealing with a young species. They were facing a civilization that turned adversity into advantage and challenges into opportunities. For nearly a full minute, not a sound echoed through the vast council chamber. The earlier laughter and mockery had evaporated like morning dew under a harsh sun. Miller stood calmly at the center, letting the weight of his words settle over the assembled representatives. The High Counselor's silver skin had stopped its rippling completely, frozen in a state that suggested deep contemplation. The crystalline beings had shifted their molecular structure to what appeared to be their most receptive configuration. Even the energy beings had condensed their forms, their usual swirling patterns slowed to an attentive stillness. Finally, a younger representative from one of the newer council species broke the silence. But your methods are chaotic," they said, their voice lacking its earlier confidence. "How can you possibly control such rapid development?" Miller nodded thoughtfully before responding. "We don't always control it. Sometimes it controls us. But that's taught us perhaps our most valuable skill, the ability to adapt rapidly to change. While other species wait generations to implement new technologies, humans are already preparing for the next innovation before the current one is fully deployed." Another long silence followed. The council members looked at each other, their various forms of communication muted but clearly active. They were beginning to understand the implications of what Miller had revealed. One of the energy beings finally spoke, their voice carrying a new note of respect. "We reviewed your historical records before this meeting. We assumed the rapid pace of your advancement would slow as you faced more complex challenges." "On the contrary," Miller replied. "The more complex the challenge, the more it drives us forward. Right now, millions of humans are working on problems your species considered impossible. Some will fail. Many will fail. But some will succeed, and when they do, they'll share their success with everyone else." The High Counselor stirred, their silver skin beginning to ripple again, but this time in a pattern that suggested deep thought rather than amusement. "You speak of failure as if it's acceptable." "More than acceptable," Miller corrected gently. "Necessary, essential, even. Every human child learns that failure is just another step toward success. We have a saying, fail faster to succeed sooner." The chamber remained hushed as the implications sank in. These beings, who had laughed at humanity's primitive technology, were beginning to realize they were watching something unprecedented in galactic history. A species that didn't just accept change, but actively sought it out. A crystalline being shifted forward slightly. "Our records show 17 major technological advances in your last solar cycle alone. We assumed the data was corrupted." Miller shook his head. "The data is accurate, and that was a slow year by our standards." More silence followed, but this time it was different. It wasn't the silence of shock or contemplation, but the silence of revelation. The council members were no longer seeing humanity as a primitive species seeking admission. They were seeing them as something entirely new in their experience. The High Counselor's voice, when it finally came, had lost all traces of its earlier condescension. "We have existed as a council for over 10,000 of your years. In all that time, we have never—" They paused, searching for the right words. "We have never encountered a species that views challenges quite the way yours does." Miller smiled softly. "That's because you've been looking for species that follow your path. We made our own." The silence that followed these words was profound. The council chamber, usually filled with the subtle sounds of thousands of different life forms, had grown so quiet that Miller could hear the soft hum of the environmental systems. They were beginning to understand that they hadn't been evaluating a primitive species at all. They had been sitting in judgment of a force of nature, one that moved at a pace they could barely comprehend. The High Counselor's next words would change the course of galactic history. But for now, the silence held, heavy with the weight of realization. The High Counselor rose from their elevated position, their silver form catching the light in a way that commanded attention. When they spoke, their voice carried none of its earlier condescension. "Ambassador Miller," they began, "in all my centuries serving on this council, I have never witnessed a presentation quite like yours." Their skin rippled in what appeared to be a pattern of respect. "We came here today expecting to educate a primitive species. Instead, we find ourselves being educated." Miller maintained his diplomatic composure, though a slight smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Education, I found, works best when all parties remain open to learning from each other." The crystalline beings chimed in harmony, a sound that the translation systems interpreted as agreement. "We have voted among ourselves," they announced. The crystalline consensus supports Earth's immediate inclusion in the Council. One by one, other species began to voice their support. The energy beings pulsed with approval. The geometric shapes aligned in patterns of acceptance. Even the younger species, who had earlier been so eager to mock humanity, now spoke in favor of Earth's membership. The High Counselor raised an appendage for silence. "Ambassador Miller, your species has shown us something we have forgotten. In our pursuit of perfection, we had lost sight of the value of innovation itself. While we waited for ideal solutions, you found ways to make imperfect solutions work." Miller nodded respectfully. "Sometimes the perfect is the enemy of the good." Indeed, the High Counselor agreed. "And now we find ourselves facing a unique opportunity. Your species' rapid advancement and unique problem-solving abilities could benefit us all." They paused, their silver skin rippling with what appeared to be anticipation. "Therefore, I propose not just Council membership for Earth, but the establishment of a new division, the Innovation Protocol." Murmurs of interest filled the chamber as the High Counselor continued. "This new protocol would combine humanity's rapid development approach with our established technologies. Together, we could advance faster than either of us could alone." Miller's eyes widened slightly. This was more than Earth had hoped for. "We would be honored to contribute our perspective and learn from your experience." The High Counselor's form seemed to brighten. "Then let it be recorded. Earth is hereby granted full Council membership, with special designation as founders of the Innovation Protocol." They turned to address the entire chamber. "Let today mark the beginning of a new era in galactic development." The chamber erupted in a different kind of sound now, not laughter or mockery, but the varied sounds of hundreds of species expressing approval and excitement. Some flashed lights, others resonated with harmonic tones, and still others shifted their forms in displays of support. As the excitement settled, Miller spoke one final time. "On behalf of Earth, I thank you for this opportunity. But I should warn you, humanity's pace of advancement might be unsettling at first." The High Counselor's response carried a note of humor, but this time it was warm rather than mocking. "Ambassador Miller, I believe that's exactly what this Council needs. We have been settled for far too long." As the formal proceedings concluded, Miller noticed something remarkable. The various species weren't maintaining their usual formal distances from each other. Instead, they were gathering in mixed groups, already beginning to discuss possibilities for collaboration. In less than a day, humanity had gone from being viewed as primitive newcomers to being recognized as valuable partners. They hadn't needed to match the Council's technology level. They had simply needed to show them a new way of thinking. As Miller prepared to transmit the news back to Earth, he couldn't help but smile at the irony. The Council had expected to teach humanity how to join galactic civilization. Instead, humanity had taught the Council how to embrace change itself. The chamber gradually emptied, but the excitement remained palpable. The galaxy was about to change, and for once, everyone was looking forward to seeing just how fast that change would come.